Hello there! Welcome to my Star Wars Through the Years video series. This is part 2, if you're just joining us or just joining me. There is an introductory video as well as a part 1. I highly suggest you go and have a look at those before continuing with this one. So, before we dive into the content of this video, I do want to just briefly double back and address a few errors and omissions from my first video. So real quick, one of the things that I said was that I felt like what I was doing was unique, right? Not the case. Since making my last video, I have discovered a few YouTube series and other videos that are kind of doing what I'm doing. Specifically, I do want to give a shout out to Mr. Nathan P. Butler. His series is called From the Star Wars Library. It does almost exactly what I'm doing, which is going through by release date rather than like chronologically in the Star Wars fiction. However, his videos are way more thorough than mine are. I'm covering several years worth of material in just under an hour or about an hour of content. He spends like 10 or 15 minutes just on one issue of a comic book. His series has over 100 episodes, and it goes right through up to, I think he got to like the early 90s. So if you like what I'm doing here, certainly go have a look from the Star Wars Library. The other thing I'm doing that I does kind of stand out from his is I do comic or video games. He doesn't cover video games in his, so his is just novels and comic books. All right. The other thing was I felt like a little preoccupied with running time with my video. I was, for whatever reason, I was like, this has to be under an hour. So I feel like I rushed through a lot of the sections of my first video. So I did want to just go back and touch on a few things I missed. Starting with the Star Wars novelization. One of the things I forgot to mention, right in the prologue, the very first couple of pages, there's a very cool reference that does come up later, which is the Journal of the Whills. So when at the inception of Star Wars, I think the idea was George Lucas wanted to kind of imagine that like this was a saga that had been recorded in these ancient texts and was like passed down, and like we are reading these or experiencing these ancient texts called the Journal of the Whills. That idea was abandoned, obviously, for the trilogy, but it does appear here in the novelization, and we do finally get a reference to it in Rogue One, right? The character Chiro describes himself as a guardian of the Whills, right? Which I think is meant to be kind of a direct callback to that idea. So that's kind of cool. Reference to the Journal of the Whills there, the very first Star Wars novelization. I talked about these comic strips that appeared in Pizzazz magazine, and I kept referring to them as like the Pizzazz magazine comic strips. They also appeared in Star Wars Weekly. In fact, only the first few strips appeared in Pizzazz. So I did want to just correct that and clarify that. So in my first video, when I was referencing the Pizzazz comic strips, they also appeared in Star Wars Weekly. And in fact, I'm going to talk more about Star Wars Weekly in this episode and exactly what that is. Classic Star Wars. So I had mentioned that this series, the Star Wars Early Adventures comics, this is issues 1 through 9, collects the same material that was in the big hardcover books, these guys, the newspaper strips. There are actually a couple missing that they did not print in these comics. So if you do want the full original comic book or newspaper comic strips, you are going to have to use the volume 1 of this series. And again, I'm going to talk more about these today as well. So again, just wanted to clarify that. If you're looking at these comic books, you are going to be missing a couple of stories. What else? I feel like I rushed through Splinter of the Mind's Eye. I was so preoccupied talking about how much I didn't like that book that I didn't even really give much of a synopsis or tell you any interesting references. Again, there is a reference in there that does come up much later in the Star Wars saga, which is the Kyber Crystal. Here in 2020, 2021, we think of the Kyber crystals as being the things, that the Jedi use inside their lightsabers, right? That's the thing that powers their lightsabers. It made its first appearance all those years ago in Splinter of the Mind's Eye, albeit in a slightly different form. Here in this novel, it's like this big crystal that anyone who possesses it enhances their Jedi Force powers. And one of the characters in the novel has just a shard of it, right? And that's kind of what is the inciting incident that sends Luke on this quest, Luke and Leia, to find this Kyber crystal before Vader and the Empire gets their hands on it. But again, that's the general gist of the novel. Luke and Leia are on their way to a planet for some kind of rebellion diplomatic thing. And they crash on this alien world. And it's a swamp-like world, which was one of the things I wanted to bring up, was that I feel like Dagobah is kind of came out of that idea of that original planet. I think it was called Mimban or something. But right down to the description of Luke's X-Wing crashing on that world, the way it's described in the novel, I instantly thought of his crash landing on Dagobah. So I thought that was kind of interesting, of a setup for what was to come. So Luke and Leia crash on this planet. They discovered that there's this secret Imperial base there. And then they meet up with that old woman character that I mentioned in the previous video, and she's the one that brings up the Kyber crystal. And so the novel is sort of dominated by this race to get to the crystal before the Empire does. There's a pretty climactic battle at the end between Luke and Vader, which is kind of interesting because up to that point, I think that is the very first encounter that they have battling with lightsabers. So that's kind of neat. But again, I felt like that novel as a whole was not very good. So that was Splinter of the Mind's Eye. Last thing I wanted to kind of clarify and fix up, I felt like I rushed through these little guys, the Han Solo trilogy, or the Han Solo Adventures. So one of the things I neglected to mention is you do have to read them in a specific order. So again, it goes At Star's End, then Han Solo's Revenge, and then Han Solo and the Lost Legacy. Because there are things that carry over from book to book, so you have to read them in that sequence. One of the things that carries over is there's actually a droid character. It's actually a pair of droids. One, his name is Bollix, and he's this kind of like rundown, work droid. He's not very sophisticated, but in his chest is a little compartment which houses a like supercomputer. He goes by the name of Blue Max, but he's not very mobile. He can't really move around on his own. So Bollix kind of acts as almost like a mech for this little supercomputer that sits inside of his chest. And they appear in each of these books. In fact, they're the only characters that carry over from book to book, other than obviously Han and Chewie. Quick synopses: Han Solo at Star's End. Han is searching for an old friend of his. He's gone missing. And they sort of go on this it's almost kind of a mystery story of discovering there are actually many disappearances going on in this region of space. And it finally brings them to this like prison world way out on the fringe. And the prison itself is called Star's End. So that's what this one was about. Han Solo's revenge. At the beginning of the book, Han and Chewie are down on their luck and desperate for work. So, against his better judgment, Han takes a job without knowing all of the details. And he finds out that he's actually taken a job smuggling slaves. And when he learns this, he immediately shuts it down. He's like, I'm not doing this. But of course, then trouble erupts. There's a big shootout with these people who were supposed to hire him. And so Han and Chewie basically spend the majority of this novel like tracking down and squashing this slaver's ring. Of the three, I enjoyed this one the most. I thought this one was actually quite good. And then lastly, again, Han Solo Lost Legacy. As I mentioned in the last video, this one is like a straight up Indiana Jones treasure hunt. There is this like ancient armada that's somewhere like buried on a planet in the region, and so they're like, it's like a trail of breadcrumbs. They're trying to figure out where this treasure is, so they can get rich. The other thing that's kind of cool about these is they do take place before the events of Star Wars, of the original trilogy, and the Empire is like almost never referenced. The region of space that they're in, I believe it's called the corporate sector. And there is a power in place, a government system simply called the Authority. So they're kind of like stand-ins for the Empire, but I did think it was kind of neat that there were like different enemies, like a different antagonist in these books besides like stormtroopers. So I just thought that was kind of neat. Okay. That's it in terms of the things I wanted to go back and just kind of fix up and errors and things and omissions. So now we can move on to the point of this video, of course, which is the next batch of content. So we're looking at the years 1980 till about roughly 1983, or just early 1983. So, again, the whole point of this experience is to imagine, like, if we were a Star Wars fan from the beginning, what would that be like? All right, so let's go back in our minds. It's 1977. We've seen Star Wars. We've been reading the Marvel comics. We've had the newspaper strips to keep us satisfied, but just barely. We've been at the arcade playing Star Wars, doing the Death Star run. We've read, the novels that I just talked about, but now we're anxious. We're starting to hear whispers and rumors of what the next movie is going to be like, right? So here we are. It's 1980. Finally, we get to watch The Empire Strikes Back. Now, as I mentioned in my last video, this is the 2006 DVD release. This is the vanilla version, unaltered, no special edition, alterations, or anything. So if we're experiencing Empire the way it was in 1980, this is what you want. So it's on the second disc, okay? So, again, what can I say that hasn't already been said about these original films? Empire Strikes Back is incredible. The tone, I feel like, is very different. Everyone always says, like, oh, Empire is darker, right? Which is true. But I feel like with the first movie, it was so much more of just like, a swashbuckling space adventure. And you could almost just watch that from beginning to end, and it feels like a complete experience. But by the time we get to Empire, it's like they knew, okay, this is something big. We're going to make a saga out of this. And so there's a lot more kind of universe building in here and lore that's added. Again, things we kind of take for granted. This is the first time we actually see Luke manipulate an object with the Force and pull it to him with his lightsaber in the cave, right? We see Obi-Wan Kenobi as a spirit, as a Force ghost. So that was kind of the first time that we had experienced something like that. Jabba the Hutt, again, is referenced, but we still don't know what he looks like. We still don't see him. Another thing I totally forgot to talk about in my first video is how much they play up the Luke, Han, and Leia love triangle. Even in the comic books, the novels, like, nobody knew that Lucas was going to drop this on us, that, like, oh, by the way, Luke and Leia are brother and sister. Even straight through Empire Strikes Back, right? I mean, we get, of course, the infamous kiss at the beginning of the movie. So it's still very unclear that Luke and Leia are going to be siblings. However, Leia does seem to make a very clear choice, finally, in this one, right? We see the romance of Han and Leia really sort of taking off here, whereas in the first movie, it was a bit more, unclear. Lando Calrissian we get, super cool character. And Yoda, right? The Jedi Master. This is, again, something that I feel like we've gotten so used to and don't even think about anymore, which is that when Luke goes to Dagobah, he's not expecting this, tiny little sort of elf goblin creature to be the Jedi Master he's looking for. So I always really love that reveal in Yoda's hut, right? And again, this is really the first time we're getting the sense that, like, what it truly means to be a Jedi, the lore, the training, everything, the gravitas that comes with this title, right? All of the things that Yoda puts Luke through in his training on Dagobah finally gives us a sense of, like, the full capabilities of, like, what a true Jedi Knight can do. So that's all really neat to kind of think about, like, experiencing for the first time in 1980, sitting down and watching this movie. So Empire Strikes Back. As with the first movie, we do get a novelization, The Empire Strikes Back. This one I feel like was roughly on par with the first novelization. Nothing spectacular, but readable. It is a different author. The first one is by Alan Dean Foster. This one says by Donald F. Glut. I don't know if he ever wrote any more for Star Wars, but there it is. I feel like there's less additional content in here than there was in the first novelization. The first novelization, we get, like, all that stuff with Luke and his friends on Tatooine, deleted scenes here and there, but this one I feel like is a pretty straightforward adaptation of the film itself. I'm struggling to remember right now. I don't think there are any additional scenes that are not in the movie that are in here. One of the things I did think was kind of funny is the carbonite scene. Han doesn't say the "I love you, I know." It's different in here. I think I don't remember exactly what he says, but I think he just kind of, like, confesses his love to her as well. But I mean, nowhere near as memorable as it is in the movie. But there you have it, Star Wars novelization. We also get, once again, our pretty cool story of The Empire Strikes Back, just like the story of Star Wars. Again, it's a record, right? Vinyl. And it also, again, comes with a pretty cool booklet here of production stills and stuff. So, and again, it's just an abbreviated version of the movie with narration. I don't know. I feel like the first one was better. The narrator here, I just felt like wasn't quite as good. But it's the same idea. It's about, like, 40 minutes in length, I think. So that, again, was the only way at home for you to kind of experience the movie because, again, they didn't have the VHSs yet. So, story of Star Wars, or Empire Strikes Back. And then we also, once again, got a very cool radio dramatization, which, again, is very different from this story of Empire Strikes Back. There is a lot of additional material in here. Mark Hamill does return as for the voice of Luke Skywalker, Anthony Daniels, and even Billy D. Williams came and did the voice for Lando here. John Lithgow came on to do the voice of Yoda, and listen, I love me some John Lithgow, don't get me wrong, but I'm not sure what he's going for in this, doing the voice of Yoda. I mean, I don't know. I guess I kind of respect that he didn't try to imitate Frank Oz, but what he's doing in here wasn't quite working for me. But again, it's pretty cool. I don't know why, for whatever reason, there's a scene that sticks out in my mind. It's when Han finds Luke in the snow on Hoth, and they actually kind of sit with that for a while, and they give us a scene of Han and Luke like talking as he's like setting up the camp, and like as Luke is starting to warm up. They give us a little scene there, which I thought was kind of neat. So all of this was again very cool. I actually really highly recommend it. It is on YouTube if you want to give it a listen. The Empire Strikes Back radio drama. Very cool stuff. All right, so as far as adaptations of the film, those are your options. Obviously, you have the film itself, right? You have the novelization. You have the story of Empire Strikes Back, the vinyl, and the radio dramatization of Empire Strikes Back. All right. Now, with my first video, I moved on to comic books next, but I'm going to do it a little different this time. First thing I want to talk about is this weird little guy, Rebel Mission to Ord Mantell. Now, there are, in all of the Star Wars movies, kind of throwaway lines, I guess you could say, of references to things that happen like outside of the film. The example I used in the first one was the Clone Wars, where it's just sort of vaguely hinted at, and like we as audience members are kind of left to imagine what that means and sort of fill in the blanks. So the one in this movie, and again is always kind of one of my favorite throwaway lines, is that bounty hunter we ran into on Ord Mantell changed my mind. And so obviously everyone in the audience, or like all the Star Wars fans, are like, well, wait, what happened on Ord Mantell? What's this bounty hunter? I must know. And so they really ran with that this time. We actually get a few examples of what's going on Ord Mantell. And the first one is this. So this actually also came out on vinyl. I believe it was a 45. I decided to kind of homebrew my own and make it into a CD. So I just kind of burned it onto a CD, all right? And I just made like little packaging to kind of simulate, to kind of imitate like what it actually would look like. But anyway, it's a short dramatization. I don't even know if it was like on the radio. I think they just kind of sold this in stores. But it's all different voice actors. Like none of the actual voice actors are on here. I don't even think Anthony Daniels is on here as C-3PO, and he does everything. But they just, they're on Ord Mantell for some reason, something to do with, like getting supplies for the rebels, and Han Solo like drops somebody's name. I think Luke Skywalker, he mentions. And so this bounty hunter's like, wait, is that the Luke Skywalker that destroyed the Death Star? And he's like, then you must be Han Solo. So it's like super cheesy. Again, I don't think it's very long. I want to say it was maybe like 30 or 40 minutes. But it's on YouTube if you want to give it a listen. It's super weird. So that's Rebel Mission to Ord Mantell. All right. video games. We get not one, but 2 video games this time. So, just like with Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back did get an arcade treatment. Now, again, I'm kind of cheating here because Empire Strikes Back actually didn't come out in the arcade until 1985, after Return of the Jedi, the arcade came out. But that really would have messed with my OCD to do the Empire Strikes Back arcade in the next video, so I'm going to do it here. Weird thing about that arcade, it didn't actually get an arcade cabinet release. It was shipped as an upgrade kit for the already existing Star Wars arcade. So arcade companies just had to kind of plug this into the back of the cabinet, into the circuit board, and it just used the already existing framework of the Star Wars arcade, but just made it into, oh, now it's Empire Strikes Back. So it still is very much like the first arcade, a black backdrop with vector graphics, the wire graphics, same kind of sound effects and stuff. But instead of the X-Wing fighting TIE fighters and the Death Star trench, you're on Hoth. You start out in the Snowspeeder, and you have to shoot probe droids that are beaming up signals to the Star Destroyers. Once enough signals go up, it then moves you on to the next section, which of course is the AT-ATs, the walkers. And you actually get to use, there's buttons on top of the joystick to shoot the harpoon cable to try to trip them. It's actually really awesome. I really liked it. But you also can shoot them down if you hit them in the visor or something. So after that, you're up in space in the Millennium Falcon, trying to shoot down TIE fighters, very similar to the first game. But then the last stage is kind of weird. You're in an asteroid field, and all you're really doing is just trying to move out of the way of the asteroids. You can't shoot them down. There's really nothing to shoot at all in that section. So a couple of differences between this one compared to the original Star Wars arcade is this one you get a cool bonus. If you in the first stage, if you're shooting the probe droids, if you get a certain number of them, it gives you the letter J. And then in the next section, if you trip enough AT-AT walkers, you get the letter E. And then in the next section, if you do some odd thing, and it's pretty awesome. Overall, I almost want to say that I like it more than the first Star Wars game, except for that asteroid bit at the end. I don't know. I just feel like it's kind of a anticlimactic when you get there, was compared to in the first game, you're blowing up the Death Star. So in some ways, Empire Strikes Back Arcade is more fun because there's more variety and more specific objectives. But I don't know, you can't beat that ending of blowing the Death Star up. Now, again, like I said, it's kind of tough to experience that game if you don't have an arcade nearby, and this one especially is I would be shocked if anyone could find that one out in the wild. So again, your options are, if you've got the money and the space, 1UP Arcade makes that really cool Star Wars arcade cabinet, and the Empire Strikes Back arcade is included in there. But again, just like the first one, if you pop in Rogue Squadron 3, Rebel Strike, there's a secret, a bonus, a password you can put in and play all 3 arcades right on here. So that's the Empire Strikes Back arcade. However, there is another game that came out in this time, the Empire Strikes Back on Atari. This is a really cool game. So you are, of course, in the Snowspeeders, trying to take down AT-AT walkers. And it's a side perspective. So, you're flying very much like Defender. If you know the arcade Defender, it's a lot like that, where your Snowspeeder just flies back and forth across a plane. And all it is the AT-AT walkers are marching towards from left to right. and you just got to shoot them all down and survive as long as possible, and whatever your point is, your total is at the end, trying to get the high score. Again, it's very much of that era, right, of getting the high score. What makes this game cool, though, is you get, if you're shot by the AT-ATs, you have like shields. All right, so you can get hit, I think it's anywhere between like 3 to 5 times, but if you're able to land your speeder on certain places on the map, your shields recharge. So there's kind of this neat like risk and reward mechanic in the game. And if you survive, if your ship doesn't blow up for like 2 minutes, you get a very brief invulnerability bonus. So you can just like blast away at the AT-ATs and really try to rack your points up, your score. It handles really well. Like I was having a lot of fun with it. It was very quick to kind of pick up and learn. And again, it was challenging, but not like stupid hard that I just wanted to put it down. But I totally recommend it. Again, if you don't have an Atari, it might be hard for you to play this. In fact, now that I'm thinking about it, I didn't even look up if there were any other ways to experience it. But there it is. Empire Strikes Back on Atari. Okay, now we can get into some comics. So again, just like the A New Hope material, you've got comics in 3 different places here. You've got the Marvel Comics series, which is continuing from The New Hope. You have more of these newspaper comic strips. And we are going to talk a little bit more about this Wild Space Omnibus. So we'll get there. All right, so Empire Strikes Back picks up after we said issue 38 was the last Marvel comic that kind of covers A New Hope material. So if we're starting Empire Strikes Back, we're picking up at issue 39. And again, the first 6 issues are simply a retelling of Empire Strikes Back. So that's these guys. I feel like the covers are a lot more reliable than the first covers. I mean, I think these are pretty faithful illustrations of what happens in the story, right? Here we've got the going through the asteroids. So cool stuff. Here, first cover appearance of Boba Fett. All right. But once we get to issue 45, we get into some new content. So what's kind of cool here is we pick up with all of the characters all kind of doing their own thing. Han, of course, is encased in carbonite at this point, and he's with Boba Fett. Here's what I really liked about what they did here. I could have swore going into this, I was like, oh, they're going to find some kind of lame way to get Han back into the comics, and then they lose him again in order for it to line up with the movies. But they don't do that. I was like super impressed. Lando and Chewie are sort of on this hunt to try to find Boba Fett. What's cool about it is like it's implied that Boba Fett leaves Cloud City, but it's not like a short trip to get back to Tatooine. He has to kind of be careful and like be sneaky about how he gets to Tatooine because like he knows Lando and Chewie are after him, so he's kind of dodging them while getting back to Tatooine. So it really kind of stretches out the time that it takes Han to reach Jabba the Hutt. So a lot of the issues focus on Lando and Chewie doing that. Luke and Leia are back to that old game of, well, we need to find a new base because, Hoth has been obviously, they lost Hoth, right? So they do a lot of that. I was surprised. I thought there was going to be more content of Luke continuing his training, right? Because when we pick up with him in Jedi, we see that he's, like really come a long way in terms of his abilities as a Jedi. But we actually don't get any of that. So I was surprised there. But let's see, some standout issues. There is actually a really cool arc. So I probably should warn you right about now, there are some story spoilers. So if you're planning on reading any of these, maybe just skip ahead a little bit, because I am going to get into some very specific stuff here. Right about here, in issue 58, all of a sudden, the writing actually gets like pretty good. So there are a few things going on in these issues. They get a hold of some abandoned TIE fighters, or they were like recovered from a battlefield. And they're going to use them, of course, as a sneak attack against the Empire. So there's a few issues involving them like getting a hold of those TIE fighters. But they introduce a character here by the name of Shira Bree, and she's introduced like right away. We get a sense that she's meant to be like a romantic interest for Luke. During this mission, I believe it's in this issue. During this mission, Luke like loses his sensors go down. His ship takes a hit, and so he can't tell the difference between like enemy fighters and the ones that have rebels in them. So he relies on the Force to tell him like to sense like if there's an enemy in a ship or a friend. And so he blasts one of the TIE fighters, and when he gets back to the base, he learns that he actually shot down Shira Bree's TIE fighter. So there's a few issues where we think that Luke is, a traitor, right? And so the Rebel Alliance is like, he can't be a rebel anymore. You shot down a friend. But then we learn that Shira Bree was actually a spy working for the Empire. So the Force was like warning him, this is an enemy. So this, I think, was actually one of the best stories that that I've read so far in these comic books. After that story arc, I don't know. It's not very good. All right. I want to talk about this one. All right, so this is the second cover appearance of Boba Fett. It's kind of a big deal. I was like super excited to read this book. And then as I'm reading it, it turns out Boba Fett isn't even really in this comic. It's a totally different Mandalorian character who just looks like Boba Fett. So they pull a fast one on us, and I was really annoyed, and I was not having it. But it's a badass cover. I still really like the cover. So that's Star Wars issue 68. Oh, wait. There are a couple of more really important characters that we meet. So we meet this, like, I don't know if you'll be able to see it too clearly there. In the reflection of the helmet there's this, like, fish guy. They go to this planet where they're almost like mermen characters. And this character's name is Kiro. And he actually ends up sticking around for quite a while, even after this chunk of comics into Return of the Jedi. We still see him. He sticks around for quite a while. So Kiro is introduced in these books. So he's kind of a neat... In these books. So he's kind of a neat, fun character. And we also meet a character by the name of Dani. I think this is her first cover appearance. And she is a Zeltron. And she, again, she starts out being like competition between Leia and Han. They portray her as this very like sultry, exotic, like alien girl. I was almost reminded in Star Trek. It had very much that vibe, but she's like pink instead of green. But again, she actually ends up sticking around and becomes a bit more of an interesting character a little bit later. So she has her first appearance in these issues as well. Lastly, we also meet the Hoojibs. Yes, the Hoojibs. In their search for a new base, the rebels land on this planet. I believe it's called Agra. And it is home to... Here it is. Okay. They're not on the cover. I'll have to open it up and show you. They're this race of little, like, rabbit creatures. I feel like they're almost like the Ewoks before we had Ewoks. Except these guys are a little bit less annoying. I'll find a good picture for you. Yeah, this will work. I'm going to get right up to the camera here. All right. So, the Hoojibs. They're these like little rodent characters. Here's Leia holding one. They look a bit like rabbits. Look like really big eyes. And they have like a little antenna coming out of the top of their head. And they are telepaths. They actually speak telepathically to our characters. Now, they end up sticking around because they actually offer their world as a home base for the rebels. And so they become kind of allies to the rebels. And again, they stick around straight through to the end of the series. We'll see them quite often. So they really do make an effort here to expand the lore, give us some new characters outside of the films. It feels a lot less like they're grasping for straws the way they were in this first chunk of comic books, where they're like trying to make stories out of the things that the film provided. And finally here in Empire, it's like they're telling their own stories, which I was also really kind of impressed that they didn't like derail the main story. And like, if you read these comics straight through and then it's like time for Return of the Jedi, there's really not any kind of inconsistencies that have to be ironed out. So I think this was actually a pretty strong set of books. There are a few stinkers in here, but overall, I thought these were pretty great. The other thing they didn't do, which I thought they were going to do, was make everything about the bounty hunters. I thought it was all going to be like Boba Fett and Bossk and IG-88 and Zuckuss. But they don't appear very often, almost hardly, in these books. So I was kind of surprised. So that's the Marvel Comics set. And I'm sorry, it goes up to issue 80. Empire Strikes Back, up to issue 80. After 80, we start getting into Return of the Jedi stuff. All right. That was Marvel Comics. We also have these terrific newspaper comic strips. As I mentioned in my first video, I love these. I'm a huge fan of these. So if we're doing Empire Strikes Back stuff, we start with Volume 2. Volume 1 was All New Hope. And Volume 3. But again, kind of cheating a little bit here, because the last few stories definitely had come out after Return of the Jedi, but I just feel like they fit better with Empire Strikes Back content. And chronologically, get this, all of the stories in both of these volumes take place before Empire Strikes Back. I'm going to explain that in just a second. So check this out. At the beginning of this volume, if we start here, the very first story is Bounty Hunter of Ord Mantell. So, like I said, they really leapt at that opportunity to tell that story several times. So we've got the audio version, but the newspaper strip also took a stab at the bounty hunter of Ord Mantell. So the first page, it says, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, between the explosive end of the dread Death Star and the moment when the evil galactic empire struck back at the ice planet of Hoth, many adventures befell the Star Warriors of the Rebel Alliance. This is one of them. And each time an arc like comes to an end and they start a new story, they do a reminder that's like, after the destruction of the Death Star, before the Empire Strikes Back. It keeps reminding us that these stories in both of these volumes happen in between episodes 4 and 5. So I thought that was very, very cool. And what's even cooler is by the time we get to the end of this volume, like the last couple of stories set up them being on Hoth. So like they discover the planet Hoth by accident, and by the end of that story, one of them was like, say, this might actually be a really good place for us to set up our rebel base. And then like the story after that, it shows them all getting there and they're like digging the tunnels and setting the base up. So again, I was like really impressed that these stories kind of took that chunk of lore and content and like really ran with it. I thought that was kind of bold, actually. In terms of art style, this one, so the first one, it's the Russ Manning strips with Alfredo Alcala and friends. This one is Al Williamson and Archie Goodwin. So the artwork and the writing change from volume 1 to these books. So the first one, that first volume, remember I'd kind of described it as like very sort of Flash Gordon-esque, very simple. This time around, it's a lot more detailed, right? A little bit less like campy sci-fi and a bit more like, I don't know, modern sci-fi here. So again, really cool work with like light and shadow, the black and white. We also, oh, this was super cool. We get our first look at Admiral Akbar in these comic strips, even before Return of the Jedi comes out. So I thought that was pretty awesome, and again, a bit of a surprise. It even like advertises it. It's like really neat. Ah, found it. Here. Beginning tomorrow, a special new adventure introducing Admiral Akbar, soon to be featured in the next film of the Star Wars saga, Revenge of the Jedi, it says here. So that's right there. So again, like really kind of a bold move here, introducing a character from the next film in these newspaper strips. I mean, I don't know how widely circulated these were, but I just thought that was pretty neat. So again, I love these volumes 2 and 3, and this ends this newspaper strip. Once you finish volume 3, these newspaper strips are done. They ended those. Now, just like with the first volume, it did get the comic book adaptation treatment in the 90s with classic Star Wars. So that's these. Remember, the first chunk was called the Early Adventures, Classic Star Wars Early Adventures. These are just called Classic Star Wars. So this collects all of the material that's in these 2 volumes. And again, I really like these covers. I feel like these do a really good job dramatizing the events of those books. And a little bit different. I had a slightly different opinion of these books. Here's a good one. I had a slightly different opinion of the artwork inside. The first set, the Russ Manning stuff, I didn't like the way it looked colorized. These actually, I feel like, look fine. And I feel like they got better with like arranging the panels on the inside compared with that first batch. So again, if I had to pick, I still like these hardcover books better. But these classic Star Wars comics are not a bad option. So here's one of the ones where I mentioned where they're in Hoth. So these are pretty good. Classic Star Wars. There's a lot more of them. This is issues 1 through 20. So there's 20 comics for classic Star Wars compared to just the 9 from early adventures. So, Marvel Comics, newspaper strips, and then we have this really, really weird set of stories that are gathered in 2 places. Again, Star Wars Omnibus, Wild Space 1, but we also got this random 2-issue set. It's called Devil Worlds, Star Wars Devil Worlds. It's in 2 books, right? Now, here's what's going on with these stories. So earlier in the video, I mentioned something called Star Wars Weekly. Here's what was happening. So in the UK, Marvel Comics had an imprint it was just called Marvel UK. And over there, they publish comic books weekly, not monthly. So what they'd had to do was they would get the material that we were publishing here in America, but instead of publishing it in one book, they'd have to split it up and publish it into like 2 or 3 comics, like shorter comics. For whatever reason, the timing was off and they needed to fill a few issues. And somehow they were granted the opportunity to write and do their own Star Wars comics. And so these were like the filler stories in between. And boy, let me tell you, in terms of style and tone, these are like so different. Here, I'm going to show you just a little bit here. This is one called The Dark Lord's Conscience. All right, you see the cover there is from the Devil Worlds here. So Vader is like playing some kind of it's like a chess game or something with this like Cthulhu floating alien creature. He like torches him at the end. What's interesting about this is I feel like this is the first story where Vader is portrayed not quite as a protagonist, but like you're kind of rooting for him by the end of the story. So that by itself was very different. But I mean, just like the artwork is very different in these stories. Several of them are written by Alan Moore. Yes, that Alan Moore of Watchmen. They're like just so strange, all very like morbid almost, very adult stories here. Which one is it? There's one called Telotny Throws a Shape. That one's by Alan Moore. Yeah, here it is. Alan Moore, writer. Telotny Throws a Shape. This one is about a group of like godlike beings that just happen to stumble upon Leia being chased by stormtroopers, and their perception of time and reality is so like drastically different from ours that like they don't understand what's happening with the rebellion and the Empire. They like send the stormtroopers through time. It's crazy. It's very strange. But I mean, that's just an example of like what these stories are like. Here's another one where again they're all captured by these omnipotent god beings, and they're brought into almost like a haunted house. It's like just really strange stuff. So they are all gathered here in the Wild Space Omnibus. So the stories that are collected here are Death Mask, The Dark Lord's Conscience, Dark Knight's Devilry, Flight of the Falcon, Blind Fury, Rust Never Sleeps. That was the other Alan Moore one. This one's really cool. This one is on a world. It's made up completely of discarded droids. So many that it like actually creates this sort of metallic planetoid. 3PO and R2 end up there somehow, and they have to like escape. The Pandora Effect and Talatni Throws a Shape. Those are all of the stories that are collected here and in Devil Worlds. But again, there's one story missing from here that you can only get in the omnibus, and that was Death Mask. But again, the rest of them are collected here. Very strange stories, but there they are. I think that's everything for comic books. So you got your Marvel Comics issues 39 through 80 plus annuals 2 and 3. Don't forget those. The classic newspaper comics volumes 2 and 3, and the Devil Worlds stories, which you can get either in the omnibus or in these 2 books. But again, if you go with these, you're missing one. So, omnibus. So those are your comic books. All right. There were no additional novels released during this chunk of time. So I've got no books to talk about. It was literally just the novelization of Empire Strikes Back. So I'm just going to move on ahead to wrap this video up with our supplemental materials. Just like in the previous video, we get The Art of the Empire Strikes Back. Now you'll notice this is the first edition. Believe it or not, I had a harder time finding the other one. When I did A New Hope, I got this. This is the second edition, and I like the covers so much more. But for whatever reason, like I was really struggling to find one for a reasonable price. So I ended up going with the first edition. It was cheaper. I hate this cover, but again, the content on the inside is the same. Really, really great books. This one contains all just concept art, again with captions and stuff. But the script is not in here, but it is with New Hope and Return of the Jedi. Damn, just super cool artwork. Love these. This is all divided. God, this is one of my favorite ones. I absolutely love that. All the Ralph McQuarrie stuff is so good. So, I have to be a little bit gentle with this. The binding is actually starting to come apart here. But again, really terrific content in here. I can't recommend these enough. As I mentioned a moment ago, this one, I was kind of surprised. The script is not in here the way that they did in the other one. But they did release this, The Empire Strikes Back notebook, which at first I thought was kind of redundant. I was like, oh, this is just the same thing as the art of Star Wars, but this has the script in it. So I don't know. I guess perhaps they saw an opportunity to like cash in on two different books. But then the strange thing is that they went back to the script and the artwork being in one for Return of the Jedi. So I don't know. I just thought that was a little odd. But this one doesn't have it. There's no. I don't think there's really any full color artwork in this one. This is a lot more like the sketchbook, which I'll show you again in just a second. So this is the Empire Strikes Back notebook, but again, I feel like it's kind of redundant. This is the sketchbook, just like the one that was released for A New Hope. And again, this one has all black and white sketches, all sort of concept art of both vehicles and characters, whereas the first one was only vehicles. But again, I love this book. This really has a lot of great material in it. So I also highly recommend this book a lot. Oh yeah, Slate 1. Love it. Finally, I unfortunately have to talk about a thing that I don't have in my hands, which is the Empire Strikes Back portfolio. I had mentioned in my first video that the Star Wars portfolio was tough to get a hold of. Boy, let me tell you, the Empire Strikes Back portfolio, you don't want to know the prices that thing is going for on eBay. Forget it. I don't know if I'm ever going to get my hands on it, but it's exactly like the Star Wars portfolio. It comes in a really big envelope, and inside are loose leaf lithographs of Ralph McQuarrie's concept art for Empire Strikes Back. It's gorgeous. A lot of those images do also appear in the art of Empire Strikes Back. So, I mean, that's something. But, again, if that's something you can get your hands on, I always recommend Ralph McQuarrie's stuff. So that's our supplemental material. The art of The Empire Strikes Back, The Empire Strikes Back notebook, The Empire Strikes Back sketchbook, and The Empire Strikes Back portfolio. All filled with a lot of really great content. Okie dokie. Ladies and gentlemen, I think that is all of the Empire Strikes Back content. Believe it or not, I feel like it's less material because there was no novels, but still quite a bit to look at. I mean, we get 2 volumes of those newspaper strips. We get 2 video games this time, so a lot of really great stuff here. So that is the Empire Strikes Back experience if you were alive in 1980 to 1983. A lot of really good stuff there. The universe building is really starting to come into its own, and plowing ahead towards the finale, the end of this trilogy, Return of the Jedi, comes next. So hopefully you will join me there. We've got a lot of material to talk about with that one. Very excited to make that video. So I hope you've enjoyed this one, and I hope you will join me next time with Star Wars Through the Years. Until then, may the Force be with you.